Okay, new week, new Parsha. It's happened again, huh? Isn't it incredible? Parsha's Mattot. The truth of the matter is that Baruch Hashem, we're very slowly but surely we're getting to the end of Sefer Bamidbar. We've got 2 more weeks. This week and next week, Mattot, and then Parsha's Masai, and then we're done, and we'll move into Sefer Dvarim, which of course is pretty exciting because it means that we're coming towards the end of the cycle, and then we'll start up all over again. For those of us that have done this before, then maybe the excitement's a little bit less. I don't know. But let's have a look at Parsha's Mattos. So before we go any further, something very interesting. We're on page 900. Something very interesting over here. Something which those of you that have been around for a while, you'll know that there's a certain order within which the halacha is taught to the Jewish people. So normally what happens is that in times gone past, that Moshe would receive the halacha from God. He would then teach it to Aaron. Aaron then would sit down next to him, and then he would teach it to Aaron's, he would teach it to Aaron's children. And then they would sit down next to Aaron, and then he would teach it to the Zkanim, to the elders. And then he would teach it to whoever wanted to hear it. There was a whole process. It would take 4 goes until the halacha was taught over to everybody. Over here, there's a whole new system. Something else is happening altogether. He's coming and he's teaching halacha, which is going to be taught to the heads of the tribes only. It's not going to be given out in the way that it's been given out up until now. Again, up until now, you've got Aaron, Aaron's children, the elders, and then the Jewish people. Now what have we got? It's going only to the heads of the tribes. In a minute we'll see why. What is it that's being taught in a slightly different way? So verse number 3. That if somebody takes a vow, it's called making a neder. You make a vow that you're going to do something, or you swear an oath, 2 different kinds of obligations that you're taking upon yourself. Right? That whatever you take upon yourself, you're supposed to stand by what you did. What the Torah is going to teach us now is that there is a method within which you can undo an oath that you've taken. So the question over here, before we go any further, is why is this particular halacha over here the law that's being taught only to the heads of the tribes and not being taught to everybody? So the Ramban Nachmanides explains that the reason is that this is not a halacha which is supposed to be something which is open to everybody. Why not? Because under normal circumstances, a person is supposed to stand by his word. If a person makes an obligation of some kind that they're going to do something, they accept upon themselves a responsibility, then they should do whatever it is that they've accepted upon themselves. They should not be looking for ways to get out of it. However, the Torah, Judaism being the most realistic religion in the world, there has to be a method that a person can undo that obligation that he's made. So now that Torah is coming to teach it to us, but who's going to be in charge of taking care of undoing these nedarim, these oaths that people have made? Well, it's not open to everybody. It's something that should only open to the leaders of the Jewish people in order to teach the Jewish people themselves that under normal circumstances this is not something you should do. Which means you made an obligation, you should stand by what you said. Yeah.
Did the Sanhedrin exist at this point?
No, they had yes and no. They didn't have a Sanhedrin in the way that, in the standard understanding of a Sanhedrin. What they did have, though, was a body of 70 elders who were the leaders, the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people. And Moshe, of course, stood on the top. So it was like a quasi-Sanhedrin. It didn't have the same kind of authority that the Sanhedrin would have later on. Because obviously the ultimate authority over here rests with Moshe Rabbeinu.
Is that Great Assembly, or is that just...
No, the Men of the Great Assembly is something else. The Men of the Great Assembly is something called the Anshe Knesset Gdola. That was a body of, it was comprised of hundreds of people, the Anshe Knesset Gdola, and it was also something which existed for hundreds of years as well. It wasn't exactly the same as the Sanhedrin. I once heard an interesting thing. This is what people say, right? Why are the halachas of standing by your word being taught to the leaders of the community? Because they're normally the ones that promise things and never follow through, right? So what we're being taught over here is that if you take on an obligation, then that's something that you need to be doing whatever it is that you've taken upon yourself. However, you need to know something in general. There is a little phrase which you may or may not have heard people using, which is bli neder. Oh, yeah. Bli neder is the most wonderful loophole to get out of being responsible for anything, right? Because bli neder means that you're not taking upon yourself. You'll do it, right? I guess the equivalent of bli neder. I hate to use this analogy, but I guess in the secular world, the equivalent of bli neder is fingers crossed. You don't really mean it, right? So you say, I'll meet you at such and such a place at 5 o'clock, bli neder, and that means that you're not absolutely tying yourself into this obligation. Otherwise, it's a problem. There's a problem within Judaism, within Jewish law, that if a person makes a statement, a definitive statement, it becomes something which is obligatory upon him. So if you say to somebody, I'll meet you at 5 o'clock at such and such a place, and you don't say bli neder, then that means that you've just obliged yourself to do that. And if you don't do it, it's a problem. You haven't lived up to what you were going to say. So the phrase bli neder is a wonderful little method of making sure that, you're not really saying, I'll meet you at 5, but I'm not going to be there. What you're really saying is that you hope you're going to be there if nothing stops you from being there. When I was a kid...
Is that a novel? I can say to you, I'll meet you at 5 o'clock, or I swear to meet you at 5 o'clock.
No, the emphasis is like this, that even if you say, I meet you at 5 o'clock, you're really obligating yourself to be there at 5 o'clock. You don't necessarily have to use the phrase, I swear to do whatever it is. Right? Once you've brought something out of your mouth, you've turned it into something which is, which has got an awful lot of weight to it. When I was a kid, my mother used to tell me to do things. I'm sure your mother's never told you to do anything, but for some reason my mother did. She'd ask me to clean up my room and, things like that. And I would say, yeah, sure, Mum, I'll do it, bli neder. And she would wag her finger at me and she would say, don't you bli neder me. She knew perfectly well, right, that if I was going to say bli neder, I had no intention of doing it whatsoever. It's a phrase to hold on to. What we're learning over here is something very fascinating over here. The power of human beings is to turn something into something which it wasn't when it first began. I'll give you an example. A person can take upon themselves that they're not going to eat bread, or you're not going to eat cake, right? So if a person says, I'm not going to eat cake, then what has he just done? He's just turned cake into something which is as non-kosher to him as a piece of bacon is to everybody else. The power of the human voice is such that it can turn something into something else altogether. Right? So again, for example, a person can take his possessions and he can say, I'm dedicating everything I have to the temple. He's just elevated everything from being pretty mundane into something which is now imbued with kedusha, with holiness. The same is true with the concept of making a neder. What is a neder? A neder is that a person says that I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to eat that, or I'm not going to have benefit from whatever it is. And the minute the person says that, that thing has now got a completely different classification to it than it would have had if he hadn't have said it. So let's go back to cake for a minute, right? Cake is fine. You can eat cake, right? You can eat cake. Might even be a worthy pastime. I don't know, right? But if a person takes upon himself not to eat cake and he makes a neder, then if that person eats cake, what's happened to him? What's he done? He's sinned. Right? When we sit down and we eat a piece of cake, we're not sinning. But a person takes upon himself not to eat cake and then he sits down and eats a piece of cake. What's he doing? He's going against what he's just said. And that has a din of being a sin. It's the most incredible thing. We're going to see over here. We're going to see the most incredible things over here. Let's say, for example, a person takes upon themselves that I don't know, a person takes upon themselves that they're not going to eat a certain kind of food. and then they go into a restaurant and they order that food and they get given something else by mistake. Did he sin?
No. He's eating something else.
Here, so now we're going to learn something over here which is fascinating, which is what? Inside of Judaism, there's not just a practical dimension, but there's also a spiritual dimension as well, right? Which means, let's say, for example, a person says that he's not going to eat chopped liver. He goes into a restaurant and he orders chopped liver, right? He swears he's not going to eat chopped liver, and he goes into a restaurant and he orders himself chopped liver, and they end up bringing him this what's it called? It's ersatz chopped liver made out of aubergine, vegetarian chopped liver. Hashem Yishmor, we shouldn't know from such things, right? But vegetarian chopped liver. And he doesn't know that it's vegetarian chopped liver, and he eats it. Did he sin? In the spiritual realms, he sinned, right? Because he took upon himself not to do that, and he doesn't know that what he's eating right now is not the real thing. He doesn't understand that. In the same way, what about if a person orders vegetarian chopped liver because he's taken upon himself not to eat chopped liver, and he ends up being given real chopped liver without realizing, and he eats it? Did he sin? So for sure he sinned. On a practical level he sinned because he ate something that he wasn't supposed to eat. But on a spiritual level, his spiritual sin is a lot less, because he had no idea that what he was doing was not allowed. You hear the difference? Which means like this, that in Judaism, our actions are going to be judged not just by what we physically do, but it's going to be judged by what we think as well. What our intentions are when we do something. It's a little bit disturbing, right? Because it means that not only do we have to do the right thing, but we have to do the right thing for the right reasons as well. For a lot of people, it's like maybe they think to themselves, it's enough that I'm doing, it's enough that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, leave me alone. I once said, it says like this, a very famous Gemara. The Gemara says that God came to all the other nations of the world and he offered them the Torah before he gave the Torah to the Jewish people. And they asked, what's in it? And it says that, to the children of Esav, it says, Lo yisirtzach, you're not allowed to murder. They said, we can't do that. We'd love to be able to take it, but it's not for us. And then he says it goes to the Bnei Yishmael, to the children of Yishmael, and they say, what's in it? It says, Lo yisignov, you're not allowed to steal. And they say, we'd love to do this, but we can't do it. Can't live by that. So somebody called the Simcha Zara, one of the Hasidic commentaries, he says like this very interesting thing. He says, what do you mean you can't do that? Not murdering and not stealing are part of the 7 Noachide laws. Everybody has to keep those. If God would have come and he would have said that you're not allowed to eat fish by taking the bones out before you put it into your mouth, and then you've got to, right? Okay, I can understand. But to come along and say that we don't do this business of not murdering, we can't do that, or we don't steal, we can't do that. How can they say that? So the Simcha Zaran explains like this. By keeping the mitzvahs, not only are we doing God's will, but it's supposed to turn us into better people as well. Which is, every time we do a mitzvah, not only are we doing God's will, but it's supposed to be fine-tuning within us first of all, our obedience to God, right? The fact that we subjugate ourselves to God's will. And secondly, it's supposed to turn us into slightly better people than we were before we did the mitzvah. So the Simcha Zaran explains that the non-Jewish nations of the world are coming to God and they're saying like this: you want us not to murder? We won't murder. You want us not to steal? We won't steal. But don't tell us how to become better people. We'll live by the rules, but we're not doing anything that's going to change the inner dimension of who we are. Here, the Torah is saying not like that. The Torah is saying that when we do mitzvahs, not only is it making us do something here in the physical world, it's making us do God's will in the physical world, but it's turning us into better people as well. We're supposed to become slightly more flexible, slightly more thoughtful, slightly more gentle. By every time we do that mitzvah, it's going to turn us into better people than we were. Okay, I'm going to take that as stunned silence, right? I think you're thinking to yourselves, how could you possibly become even better than you are, right? That's beyond comprehension, human comprehension anyway, right? So here, let's have a look at verse number 4. V'isha kisido neder Hashem v'osroi sabavei savir menurea. What happens if a girl makes a vow? She makes a prohibition for herself. She says she's not going to eat cake ever again, or she's not going to make, even worse, she's not going to make chocolate cake ever again. Right? She can not eat cake as much as she wants, but not to make cake, that's already, that's no good. V'shama v'es nidra, and her father hears her making the vow, ve'esra sha'asra nafsha, ve'chrish la'aviyah, and the father says, no, I'm cancelling, I'm nullifying the vow. V'komu kone dareh v'chol isa asher alsa nafsha yokum. You hear what's going on? The father has a certain jurisdiction over his daughter before she gets married, that if she makes a vow that he's not happy with, he can nullify the vow, but only if he does it as soon as he hears about it. Which means that if he says to himself, you know what, I got to think about this till tomorrow, that's no good. It's got to be done on the spot.
Until what age?
Huh?
What age?
The truth is, it's until she gets married. And then once she gets married, then if the husband hears, then he can nullify the vow as well. I don't know if anybody here, if you're familiar with what goes on Erev Rosh Hashanah, there's something called Hatarat Nedarim. What is Hatarat Nedarim? On Erev Rosh Hashanah, you have very, very, very long service before you begin davening in the morning. Very, very long series of slichot that are recited. Then you pray the regular morning services. And then at the end, there's something called Hataras Nedarim. What is Hataras Nedarim? You get up in front of the Beis Din, 3 people, and you announce that all of the Nedarim, all of the oaths that you've taken upon yourself, you are nullifying them, except for the oaths which are positive. Why is that? Because the truth of the matter is, however careful a person tries to be, right? We all know that there are going to be moments when you're going to say something where you take an obligation upon yourself and you weren't paying a lot of attention. You didn't say Bli Neder, whatever it is, right? So before Rosh Hashanah, we'd like to begin the year nice and clean of all of the all of the oaths that we may have made. So we do something called Hataras Nedarim. What about during the year? What about you took upon yourselves an oath to do something, and now you're sorry that you took it upon yourself? Okay, we're not talking about doing a mitzvah. Let's go back to eating cake, right? You took upon yourself the oath that you're not going to eat cake anymore. Now you're sorry that you did it. So what do? You have to come in front of a Beis Din. You have to find 3 people, and at least one of them has to know what it is that you've accepted upon yourself, what you obligated yourself to do. And then they'll say to you like this, are you sorry? If you would have known that you would feel like you do right now when you took it upon yourself, would you have done it? And the obvious answer is no. And if the person answers no, then at that point they say, mochulach, 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 that your obligation is no longer an obligation, and you're free to able to eat cake from now on. Right? That's the way that a neder. That's what happens when a person makes a neder. It's interesting. We spoke about this the other day. Nun. The number nun represents the number 50 in gematria, in numerical values. Number 50 is always, there are many, many different gates that exist inside of Judaism. There's the gates of tears and the gates of wisdom and the gates of all different kinds of things. And they all have 50 levels to them. The 50th level is the complete understanding of something. So the 50 levels of wisdom, 50 levels of spiritual impurity, 50 levels of spiritual purity. The idea of being able to make a statement and turn something from being kosher to being non-kosher for you has got a tremendous dimension to it, right? Again, somebody gets up and says they're not going to eat cake ever again. What have they just done? They've just turned cake for them into something which is as unkosher as a piece of bacon, right? So it explains, one of the Hasidic Rebbes, the Shemi Shmuel, he says like this, the word neder comes from the idea of nun dar. The word dar in Aramaic means to live inside, to live. In Aramaic, you wouldn't say ani gar po, you would say ani dar po. I live here. Neder is nun dar, that dimension of the 50, that dimension of being able to formulate and to make something that wasn't there originally, to turn it into something brand new, is something which rests inside of each person. But you got to be careful. You got to be careful how you speak, and you got to be careful what you say, because sometimes a person may take upon themselves to, make a commitment of some kind, and afterwards they'll be sorry, and then it'll be a problem. You should know many times, on many occasions, there are shuls, all over the world where they try to raise money for the shul, so they have like an auction. And they'll start auctioning off the aliyot on Shabbat in the morning. They'll start auctioning off when somebody get called up to the Torah to recite the blessings, and they'll auction them off, and sometimes they can make a lot of money. And sometimes people get into they get into the swing of the auction, and they start bidding, and the truth is that they don't really mean to get caught with this thing. They're just thinking, it's like a game, And all of a sudden, they're stuck now with this aliyah, which they've now bid, $100 for, and nobody else has bid more than them. And all of a sudden, it's like, gosh, what did I just do? I wasn't really concentrating, and I just kept myself, pushing up and pushing up. What do you do now? So the Gemara says that when a person makes a pledge to tzedakah, to charity, and doesn't live by it, that's very bad. That's really bad. Right? Which means that we've got to be very careful. Certain things that we're going to make a pledge for ourselves, we've got to be very careful that we mean what we say, otherwise we're going to be stuck. That's really what's going on over here. Down at the bottom it says, V'mayu tiyeh le'ish unudaya alea o miftas faseh asher asra nafsha. The same kind of an idea over here. Right? That a person's married. If the woman is married and she makes a neder, she makes a vow, she's got to be very careful. If her husband undoes the vow, he nullifies the vow immediately, then it means the vow is no longer incumbent upon her. Here, what do we do in a situation where a wife makes a vow, the husband hears it and nullifies it, the wife is not aware of the fact that he's nullified her vow, and she breaks it. So did she sin?
That's a yes.
That's a yes. Right? For sure it's a yes. Why is that? Because she's not aware of the fact that it's been nullified, and in her mind, what is she doing? She's going against what it is that she obligated herself for. Now, again, we've got to separate the two. Did she physically do something which is wrong? Not really, because her husband nullified, which means that she can have that piece of cake, or she can drink that drink, whatever it is, because her husband's nullified the vow. But she doesn't know that, which means that in the spiritual realms, she's done something that she shouldn't have done. Again, verse number 9. All of this has to be happening when? On the day that the person hears about it. On the day that the father hears about it. On the day that the husband hears about it. Otherwise, it's too late.
What if it's the same day, but she's already transgressed it?
Oh, then she's stuffed. Either way, right? Which means like this: that if she made the vow, and she transgressed the vow, and her husband heard about the vow, and then he nullified it afterwards, that means that she's for sure she's sinned on all levels here. She sinned physically because she did something that she vowed that she wasn't going to do, and she's also sinned in the spiritual realms as well. Right? We have to be very careful with this stuff. Alright, it says verse number 10. What do we do? V'neder va'almona grusha. What about somebody like a widow or a divorcee? Kol asher asa nashaya kumalea. She doesn't have anybody there who can nullify her vow, and therefore she's got to live by whatever she's vowed, which means that she vows that she's not going to, she's not going to eat cake ever again. So now she's stuck with not being able to eat cake.
Does it have to be, let's say she made a vow, and a friend heard it. Can a friend nullify it?
No. Only if she's not married, only her father, and if she's married, only her husband. Yeah. Doesn't help to have friends for this particular thing.
In like today, say in this area, where the function of a base din is as important as anything, would a widow or a divorcee live by this?
she would have to come to a Beis Din. She can nullify a vow through a Beis Din. But she doesn't have the wherewithal to nullify, for somebody else to nullify her vow immediately upon hearing it. Right? Which means that under normal circumstances, if the girl's not married, then her father can do it. And if she's married, then her husband can do it. But over here, she was married, which means that she's left the domain of her father and moved into the domain of her husband. And now either her husband has passed away or they're divorced. So at that point, she doesn't have that opening to be able to have a vow nullified by her husband. So therefore, she's going to have to go to the Beis Din in order to have it done instead. Let's just go down a little bit. Verse number 15. Ve'im acharei shachrish la'isha miyoyim el yoyim ve'ikim es kol nidorei es kol asarei asher alea heikim oisam ki achrish la b'yoyim shamoy. What does that mean? It means that if the husband doesn't do anything about it, the husband hears about the vow that she's made and he doesn't react, he doesn't say no, he just lets it go, then what does that mean? It means that he's giving his tacit approval for what she's done. If that's the case, what does that mean? He can't come tomorrow and say, you know what, I've changed my mind. He can't come next week and say, you know what, I don't think this is a great idea. Yeah, it's interesting. This whole thing over here is being built around what? It's being built around an immediate reaction. If you don't have an immediate reaction, then you've lost the opportunity to be able to take care of it. Right? Why is that? So I think the answer is pretty obvious, no? Because if the husband can nullify his wife's oath at any point in the future, then she never really knows whether she's doing the right thing or she's not doing the right thing. You know, she's vowed not to eat cake. And 3 weeks later, her husband says that he's nullifying the vow, but she doesn't know about it, and now she doesn't know whether she's supposed to, she's not supposed to, she could, she can't, she might, right? Which means that the Torah is putting into place a very specific time frame. What is that time frame? It's got to be the same day that the husband hears about it or the father hears about it. That's when it's taken care of. Not necessarily the same day that it was made. Which means that the wife makes the vow on Sunday, but the husband only hears about it on Thursday. But on Thursday he says that he's nullifying it, then that's okay.
So she tells him on Thursday that I took a vow on Sunday.
Yeah.
That's the only way he would hear about it is if she said something. He either
unless
her or she says something.
Yeah.
Or what if a friend's, she told a friend and
yeah.
a friend told her.
That's also a possibility, right? Which means that she doesn't have to come herself and tell him.
So it does not have to be directly from her lips.
No. He could like you said before, he heard her telling her friend that this is what she's done. Or she told her friend and her friend came and told her husband and her husband came and told him. Right? But so long as it's the first time that he's hearing it, then he can nullify it. But it doesn't have to come from her directly. Then and it's interesting. All of these things about oaths are being designated as a chok. Now again, what is a chok? Huh? It's a law. It's more than a law. It's a specific kind of a law. A chok is a statute. Now, what is a statute? Something that we do, we don't understand why we do it, we just do it. There are 3 different kinds of mitzvahs. There are chukim, there are mishpatim, and there are edius. Chukim are laws that we're given that we don't understand, we just have to do them. Mishpatim are the laws to do with civil laws, right? How we, laws of damages, how we interrelate with each other. And edius are the laws to do with ourselves and God. So, for example, keeping Shabbos, keeping Yom Tov, they all fall inside of the category, the classification of being eduyot, right? Giving testimony. It's interesting over here. We would have thought that the concept of a neder would fall inside of the laws of mishpatim, interpersonal laws. No, that's what we just learned. That if the husband hears, if the father hears, and yet the Torah over here is describing them as being elach chukim asher tziva Hashem es Moshe ben ish leishtoi. They're being designated as a chok, as a statute. Which means what? That we can research this as much as we want and as deeply as we want, but at some point we're going to reach a point where we understand that we just have to do this because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us to do it.
Is fasting in the third category, the one where it's between you and Hashem? Or is it...
It depends. You know what? Yeah, yes and no. Which means that Yom Kippur for sure. Right? That fits into the designation of Ediot, which is you're doing this, you're bearing testimony that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from you. You have to go through a process of cleansing, of purification, and it's part of the framework of the festivals. The other times that we fast, here for example on Tuesday we're going to be fasting for the 17th of Tammuz, right? And what is that? Well, it's hard to define that exactly. Because on the one hand, we're fasting because we were not Beseder, right? We didn't do what we were supposed to do. And therefore the temple was destroyed, and there's a whole cycle of fasts that we go through in order to try to atone for the destruction of the temple and the fact that the temple hasn't been rebuilt. How are we gonna classify those? Not sure.
Does it begin in the morning?
It begins at dawn.
Yeah.
Which is pretty early right now.
What time is dawn here?
I think don't hold me to this exactly, but I think the dawn is probably around 20 to 4, something like that. Binyamin, are you looking this one up?
Yeah.
Yeah, modern technology.
4:17.
4:17. Wait, a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, 4:17, which means that you can eat up to well, let's say up to 4:16. Okay, don't push it to the last moment. Anyway, good. Okay, let's go weiter. Down at the bottom, chapter number 31. Let's move on. We're going to move into something else altogether now. That we have to go and take revenge against the Midyanim. And afterwards, you're going to be gathered up to your people. So, this is the last thing that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to do before he dies. Right? However, for those of you who were here over the last few weeks, you should really be jumping around on the edges of your seats over here, which I have to confess, I don't see anybody jumping, not on the edge of their seats, right? You're okay because you just arrived, right? But some other people over here who shall remain nameless, they should be asking over here, what does it mean when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says down at the bottom in verse number 2, Nekoim nikmas b'nei Yisrael, that we have to go and take vengeance against the Midyanim, right? We had this already, didn't we? If we go back a little while, if we go back, it says Trois HaMidyanim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told the Jewish people that they have to go out to fight against the Midianites, right? And it said over there, if you remember, Rashi, he created a new verb, la'ayev otam, to turn them into enemies, right? You can't to enemize them. That's right. That's what Rashi is saying. La'ayev means to enemize the Midianites. Remember? Say yes, please. So why are we being told again? God's already told the Jewish people that this is what they have to do. And yet over here it's saying Nakom nikmat b'nei Yisrael. You hear the what's it called? Kafel Loshen, the double language over here. Nakom nikmat. You have to go and take vengeance against the vengeance of the Jewish people. What's pshat? Why would that be?
I don't know if it's answering the question or not, but it's interesting how when you first read it, at least for me, it gives me the impression that Hashem is authorizing us to avenge another people, and yet it's not at all. It's not saying that at all. I think it's Hashem's vengeance against Midian, not
against who?
Midian.
Against Midian. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not surprising in that it goes with what Hashem has said all along.
Oh, okay, good.
We're not supposed to avenge. We're not supposed to be doing that.
Okay, good. So my question is to take what you've just said, right? And to ask, why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling us again? He's already told us this once before, not very long ago, right? So you could say that there's a little bit of detail over here which wasn't given before, which is that Moshe Rabbeinu is being told that this is the last thing he's going to do, and after that he's going to pass away. But the bottom line, if that's true, then really all it needs is for God to say, go out and fight against the Midianites, and then you're going to die. But it doesn't. It uses a very strange language. Nakom nikmat b'nei Yisrael. Again, this emphasis on the vengeance, to go out and take vengeance for the vengefulness of the vengekite of the venge of, you hear what's going on? It's like really laying it on thick, right? So how are we supposed to understand this? So for those of you who remember, which seems to be none of you, it's very depressing. But for those of you who don't remember, what's the idea? Remember, what did the Midianites do? What's the last thing that the Midianites did to the Jewish people? With the women. Right? They gave over their daughters as prostitutes to the Jewish people in order to get the Jewish people to behave immorally. And then with those immoral acts, God then acted against the Jewish people and 24,000 people died. Right? So we would say to ourselves that the Jewish people obviously have the most tremendous sense of vengeance against the Midianites because of the terrible thing that happened to them, right? And the answer is no. No, it's not, like we spoke about the other week. When you've got people coming and fighting against the Jewish people and they're coming and doing terrible things to the Jewish people, so then you don't have to be told by God that you've got to go out, la'ayev otam, to turn them into enemies. But at the end of the day, even though 24,000 people died from within the Jewish people, when the Jewish people look back at what happened, do they see that it was so terrible? You hear the problem? It happens very often. It happens to me, but it happens to, very often when I speak to people and they tell me like this. One of the things that we're supposed to do when we go through the process of tshuva is that we're supposed to feel regret for the past. Sometimes it's very difficult to be regretful for sins because, a lot of sins are very pleasurable, right? You look like you're not prepared to commit yourself to that one, but we all know that it's true, right? Let's stick with things which are okay for a family channel, yeah? Non-kosher food. Non-kosher food tastes great, doesn't it? So you ate some non-kosher food you weren't supposed to. You knew already. You'd taken upon yourself that you're going to keep kosher, and you knew that you weren't supposed to, but you were overwhelmed with the desire, and you ate it. And now says the halacha what? In order to do tshuva, in order to repent properly, what have you got to do? You've got to regret what you did. Well, you know what? That's not so simple, is it? It was good. It was tasty. I'm sorry. I'm happy to take upon myself not to do it again in the future. And I'm happy to acknowledge that I made a mistake and I shouldn't have done it. But it's almost impossible for me to say that I regret having done what I did because I enjoyed it. The people that were involved in the sin of Midian over here, did they realize that they were sinning? Now they realize that they were sinning. For sure they realize. Good.
But were they all killed?
I don't know. It's interesting to know the 24,000 people that were killed actually came from the tribe of Shimon, and it was more to do with the fact that Pinchas killed the prince of the tribe of Shimon, and less to do with what was going on beforehand. So I don't know who died exactly. But let's say,
wouldn't you assume that if the prince did that, then Kavachomer, all the people underneath him were doing that too because he was the leader. They followed the leader.
I don't know. According to the Medrash, it says like this: that the Ikka sin of what took place over there was that the tribe of Shimon weren't able to recognize that their prince had made a mistake.
So
it's interesting. It doesn't focus
that they did something.
Yeah, it doesn't focus on that at all. It focuses on what happened afterwards, and the fact that Pinchas killed the prince of the tribe, and then the tribe of Shimon rise up in a rebellion against Pinchas, and then God has to take care of things. Which is fascinating, right? Which means that the idea of we all would have thought that who's going to be killed over there? The people that were involved in the sin to begin with, but it's not necessarily so. So I don't know. Are they following what their prince did? I don't know. I don't know a source which says that the people who died were predominantly those that were involved in the sin. What's for sure is they were involved in the rebellion afterwards. All I'm saying is like this. You know, at the end of the day, that sinning with the daughters of Midian, I would imagine it was probably a very pleasurable thing to do. Which means it's very difficult to garner up a negative feeling of wanting to go out and take vengeance against the Midianite people, because at the end of the day, that person just had a pretty pleasurable time over there. And that's why God has to come along, and that's why God says, "Nekoim nikmas b'nei Yisrael." You have to understand that what took place was something which was terrible, in a certain dimension. What did Bilam say to the Jew? What did Bilam say to Balak? Bilam said to Balak that he's got this one idea, and it's going to do the most tremendous damage to the Jewish people because God hates immorality. You hear? Which means, I don't know, getting the Jewish people to eat cheeseburgers on Yom Kippur, right, would have less of a generational repercussion than having the Jewish people get involved in immorality. Immorality is something which God has a completely limited amount of patience for. You know, there are 3 cardinal sins. 3 sins which a person has to give up their life for. One of them is immorality. Right? Idol worship, bloodshed, and immorality, which means...
if they do it, they have to kill themselves?
It's more than that. It says that if somebody puts a gun against another person's head and says that you have to sleep with this woman, otherwise I'll blow your brains out, you have to allow your brains to be blown out.
But if you did it, if you did it
once it was done, you don't have to give up your life for it. But you're supposed to give up your life in order not to do it. Right? No, they're not. Then the process of tshuva becomes more complex because it's one of those enormous sins.
I would not be surprised if there was some kind of correlation between that and the incidence of a Jew spending any significant jail time, like a capital kind of crime. I'll bet it's because of that. The incidents, if you look at it per capita, if you look at how in America the prison system is set up and everything, and you look at who the inmates really are, there are very few Jews. I mean, like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. And I'll bet it comes somehow. It must be related somehow to this.
Yeah. I think so. I think first of all, I think what you'll find is that the vast majority of the Jews that are in prison are probably there on white-collar crimes.
Financial crimes.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Financial crimes.
And the small majority who are there, in high security prisons are there because, they've done what everybody else does over there in the high security jails. But
It's an outlier. Like it's an outlier. They're not going to be going for anything, very, I guess, not fiscally related.
Yeah.
Right?
The rabbi in my parents' shul, when I was a kid growing up, he was the rabbi of I think it was 3 prisons in the London area. And one of them was a high security jail. And he said that there were 8, and when he was there were 8 Jewish inmates in the high security jail. 3 of them, I don't know what the other 5 were there for, but 3 of them, of course they were Israelis, right? But 3 of them were caught, they were trying to hold up a Brinks, what's it called, one of the armored trucks. And they had weapons and whatever, they were caught. And he said what was fascinating was that first of all, he said that in the high security jail, he says nobody tried to pretend that they didn't do what they were found guilty of. He says in all the other jails that he went to, the Jews were forever complaining that they hadn't done it. He said over there they admitted to doing it. He says, and they were the ones who were the most open to, being introduced to Judaism. He says these people, all of them, one after the other, were completely ignorant. They had no real Jewish upbringing at all. But they were very open to being taught things, and there was one. He said, I remember this. One Shavuos, he got up in shul and he spoke, and he said that one of the inmates had told him that it bothers him that there aren't 2 more Jews. There were 8 of them, so they didn't have a minyan, and it bothered him that there weren't 2 more in there. So I was a kid. it was probably, I was after my bar mitzvah, I was probably like 14 or 15 or something. And I remember he sort of left us with this tantalizing, moral question. He says, tell me, so what should this fellow be davening for what? Should he be praying that 2 more Jews be thrown into the high security jail so they can have a minyan? Or should he be praying that they shouldn't? That was like, wow, that was the question of the year, right?
Yeah.
It's whatever. I mean, it's what to daven for. It's interesting, that the Chafetz Chaim used to say like this. The Chafetz Chaim used to say, "Be careful what you pray for, because you might get it." We pray and pray for things, and all of a sudden we get them, and then we realize that we didn't really want them to begin with. You see this with children. Children drive their parents nuts, little kids, to get toys, and then you buy them the toy, and then 5 minutes later the toy's been thrown into the corner, and then now they want the next one, whatever's next on the list. So I always say like this: the only qualitative difference between children and adults is the cost of their toys. That's all. With a kid, you can get away with a new box of Lego or a new Play-Doh or something. With adults, unfortunately, depending on what age they are, so maybe they need a new car, or they need a new yacht, or they need a new wife, whatever it is. But they've got to find themselves something that's going to keep them busy, right? So Nakoim Nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'eis hamidyanim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's telling Moshe Rabbeinu that this is going to be a tough one. You've got to go out and you have to get the Jewish people, galvanize them into the understanding that they've done something wrong, and that they've got to feel this sense of having done something wrong in order to be able to fight against the Jewish people. Achar te'asef alamecha. Then you're going to be gathered up amongst your people. That means that you're going to die. So listen to this, verse number 3. Vayidaber Moshe el ha'am le'mor, echaltzu mi'itchem anashim latzava. You have to bring people to make up the army. In order to take vengeance against the Midianites. Now listen very carefully to who's got to go. Elef lemateh, elef lemateh. How many people are going? This is not going to be a battle that's going to be fought by the entire standing army. Rather, it's 1,000 from each tribe. Yeah? Elef lemateh, elef lemateh, lechol matot yisrael tishlechu letzava. Everyone has to send 1,000 people into the army. Now, Rabbi, are you listening? Do you hear? It sounds almost superfluous, no? What do you mean, elef lemateh, elef lemateh? What do you mean, 1,000 from each tribe, 1,000 from each tribe? If God says 1,000 from each tribe, what do you understand? 1,000 from each tribe. So when God says 1,000 from each tribe, 1,000 from each tribe, it means we're being taught something over here, right? And then, what does he say? Every tribe has to send in. So the Gemara learns out from here that it wasn't 12,000. First of all, look at Rashi. Rashi, about a quarter of the way down of the first one, it says, L'rabot Shevet Levi. This is one of the few times when Shevet Levi is going to be included over here in sending people into the army. They've also got to cough up 1,000 people to serve in the army. But it's more than that. You need 1,000 people sitting and learning, and 1,000 people sitting and 1,000 people fighting. That's elef lemateh, elef lemateh. You hear what's going on?
26,000.
You need 20. Oh yeah. Do you know what? According to Rashi, 26,000. I'm sorry. I was going to say that's ridiculous. Don't you know how to do math? Right? 2 times 12 is 24, but it's not. 2 times 12 is 26. Apparently, right?
Plus 1,000 times 2.
Yeah. Which means that, but what is fantastic over here is, what are we learning?
I'm sorry, it says 12,000.
Huh? Here, we're going to get to it in a moment. Hold on a second. Right? But what is fascinating is this, that the Torah is saying like this, that the same way that you need people to go out to fight, you need people to sit down and learn as well. Which means that of course you need an army, but you need a spiritual army that's behind the physical army, and you need a physical army that's ahead of the spiritual army. You hear? It's a symbiotic relationship between the two in order to allow for the physical army to win and to be victorious. You have to have the spiritual army in the background doing what they need to do. Elef lemateh, elef lemateh, lechol matot Yisrael tishlechu letzava, V'yimasru mi'alfei Yisrael elef lematei shnei masa elef chalutzei tzava. So you, right, jumped ahead and read a verse ahead, and you say, hold on a second. Rashi says that you've got to have Shevet Levi as well, which means there are 13,000. And yet over here it says 12,000. Something's wrong. So the emes is, you need to know a little bit of Hebrew grammar. Let's have a look and see.
I did read ahead. You said it. You.
Oh, no, but here, Doug read verse number 5.
Sorry.
Please don't let it happen again. Here, let's have a look. If you know anything at all about Hebrew grammar, the first word in verse number 5 is v'yimasru. So they were delivered from the thousands. You hear? It's a very clumsy syntax, right? So they were delivered. V'yimasru is passive in Hebrew grammar. They were passed over. They were given over. It should really say v'yelchu, and they went. But it says v'yimasru. Why is that? Because the Jewish people understand that as soon as the battle with Midian is over, what's going to happen? Moshe Rabbeinu is going to die, right? Therefore, they don't want to go to the army. They're not prepared to go. Because they understand that if they go to the army, it's a catch-22, right? If they go to the army, then they'll defeat Midian. And if they defeat Midian, what's going to happen? Moshe will die. So they say, you know what? We prefer not to go to the army. And that way we can't defeat Midian, and then Moshe won't die. 12 out of 13 of the tribes did not want to give over their 1,000 soldiers. But there's one tribe that gave over their 1,000 soldiers, which is which tribe? The tribe of Levi. Because the tribe of Levi is famous for doing whatever God wants it to do, even if it goes against what they want. You hear? So when it says like this, elef lemate, and Rashi says that you have to include the tribe of Levi in there, which means presumably that it's 13,000 and not 12. But when it comes to giving over the soldiers, 12,000 of these soldiers were given over involuntarily. They didn't want to go. They were made to go. V'yimasru, they were given over. 12,000 out of the 13,000 didn't want to be there. Shevet Levi, they didn't want to be there either. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to do something, that's what Shevet Levi is famous for. That's what they do. You hear? Anybody here from Shevet Levi? Yes? No? Maybe? No? Okay. You can be. There's a very famous halacha. The Rambam writes at the end of Hilchot Shmita v'Yovel that Shevet Levi needs to be supported by the Jewish people because of their, this intense connection they have with God, and then he says that anybody can join themselves to Shevet Levi. You can become an honorary Shevet Levinik. You know how you become an honorary Shevet Levinik? By doing the will of God, even when you don't want to do it. That's not bad, huh?
You guess then we are, then, right?
I hope so. Mitzvah Hashem, yeah. Good. We're going to stop over here. Mitzvah Hashem, to be continued.
So, yeah.